Okay, so now we've started. Attendees are automatically muted and will have the opportunity to speak later during the public input portion. If you can, please rename yourself to include your first and last name so we can call on you to speak. And feel free to use the Q&A function at any time throughout the presentation if you have questions, and I will try to answer when I can. And I'd like to give a little bit of background about how we advertise this meeting. So we sent out over 700 flyers to all addresses within 300 feet of Broadway. We also posted this meeting on the city's social media accounts, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. It's been posted on the city's website for quite some time now. And we also put out a press release in the Malden Advocate. So I just want to do a quick poll to see the types of people who are here tonight, and I'm going to launch that right now. So it's just asking your relationship with Broadway. Are you a business owner? Are you a nearby resident? Do you live elsewhere in Malden but might use the corridor to drive, take the Northern Strand Community Trail? Or maybe you live outside of Malden and might travel through the corridor, just interested in kind of this project. So I'll give it a couple more seconds for folks to vote in. Okay, and I can see that almost everyone has voted. It looks like we have a fair amount of, diverse amount of people here. We got some folks who are outside of Malden. We have some nearby residents and then also business owner who are here during the meeting tonight. So thanks for sharing that. Just good to get an idea of types of people that are coming to this meeting. So let's move on. So the agenda tonight is to give a little bit of background on the project itself. Then I'll go over the existing conditions of Broadway, what we see today. I'll give an overview of complete streets and how the state and federal government are funding these types of projects. Then we'll get into the public input part of the meeting where the majority of discussions will take place. And then I'll discuss the next steps. So for some background on the project, we're talking about Broadway here, which is Route 99. And the project would run from Melrose City Line to the Everett City Line. So the map on the left, you can see indicated in red, that's the portion of Broadway that goes through Malden. And I've put in some of the landmarks to help orient you on the map. On the right, you'll see Route 99 in the greater regional picture. So you can see that Route 99 not only goes through Malden, but it starts in Saugus, connects to Everett, and then Boston. So it's a corridor with a lot of regional importance, which is why redesigning a project like this is important not only for Malden residents, but the region's connectivity and transportation network. So why are we here tonight? The city is seeking millions in federal funds to reconstruct Broadway to better move people throughout the corridor. And to draft a conceptual design of what we want this to look like, we need to hear from residents about their 1, concerns, 2, ideas for improvements, and 3, the overall transportation vision for the corridor. And I'd like to just note that the city is still in listening mode right now, so all feedback is welcome. I know that in the past there have been some images and kind of conversations about how the city has already decided on how they want to design Broadway. That was a part of, as an example, as part of the Broadway Corridor Framework Plan, just as an example of showing what could be done. But I'd just like to make clear that the city has not made any final decisions yet, and we're still listening to residents to get the feedback that will inform how we redesign the corridor. So how did we get here tonight? Like I just mentioned, in 2020, we completed the Broadway Corridor Framework Plan. And from that plan, there was a key transportation finding, and I have it in the bottom left-hand corner here. And it reads, traffic congestion, speeding, and a lack of general upkeep contribute to a perceived poor quality of life in the corridor. Efforts to make the transportation network more efficient for all modes of travel, vehicular, pedestrian, bicycle, and public transit, would increase economic opportunities and socioeconomic benefits. So using that key transportation finding brings us today where we are working on the Reimagining Broadway project, 2 components, zoning and transportation. And obviously we're here tonight for the transportation portion. So the purpose of our project is to take that key finding from the framework plan and conduct a thorough transportation analysis of Broadway so we can understand the gaps in the transportation network and create a plan to address it with a redesign. So underneath, you can see there are 3 components of the project: the existing conditions analysis, The city of Malden has been working with our consultant BSC, who have done traffic counts, site surveys, and pavement probes to understand, what are the existing conditions today? How many people are driving through the corridor? What's the actual pavement made of? What needs to be redone? So we have an understanding of the corridor itself. Now we're in the community engagement phase, where we're talking with residents to hear about their concerns, ideas for improvements, their overall vision. And then once we take those into account, along with the existing conditions analysis, we're going to be able to develop some conceptual designs of the corridor. So let's look at Broadway in its current state right now. So this isn't Broadway today. This is Broadway back in 1908. When I was doing research about this project, I found this image showing Broadway back when there used to be streetcars on the roadway. And that's probably a reason why the roadway is so wide. So it could have both vehicular, pedestrians, and then streetcars here. So let's look at Broadway today. And I have several slides that have different existing conditions photos. So you can see that in portions of Broadway, there are 4 lanes, and then in others, there are 2 lanes. The traffic signal equipment is quite antiquated and isn't really up to date with the technology that exists today that makes traffic flow more efficiently and safely. There aren't any facilities on which bicyclists can travel safely down the corridor. Sidewalks are in pretty rough shape. Some of them don't have curb cuts, which if you are using an assisted mobility device or walking your child or using a stroller, that makes it very difficult to travel down the corridor. As you can see in the middle, there's an MBTA bus stop, and there isn't even a sidewalk, and there's a footpath that people take. And in the northern portion of the corridor, there are parts of the sidewalk that have utility poles in the middle. That is, another accessibility issue. And then finally, we have crosswalks that aren't safe, that don't have updated pedestrian crossing equipment. There are folks that are required or not required that are forced to walk along that dirt path. Really long intersections that don't have crosswalks, and again, a lack of facilities for bicyclists. So those are some of the images we see of Broadway today. So like I mentioned before, as part of this project, our consultants did a lot of work to understand the current state of traffic on the corridor. So they performed some traffic counts to determine what is and is not feasible for potential roadway redesigns. We have a toolkit of options that we can adopt, and we want to make sure that whatever we implement, it's not an arbitrary decision. It's based on data that will make sure that we can have people flow freely throughout the corridor and safely. So I'm going to include some examples from our consultants on the following pages of the results of some of these analyses, but just keep in mind that this is just the surface of everything that's been performed so far. So in this image here, this is a nice visual that was created by our consultants. This is Broadway to the left. That is the heading towards the Melrose City line. To the right is the Everett City line. You can see that the portion of Broadway in between Salem and heading up to Melrose, there are a lot of vehicles there compared to the middle part, and then the southern part wherever it is. So findings like these are really important to understand, where is the majority of traffic along Broadway, so that we can inform parts of our design that will make sure that we're accommodating vehicles, but also other modes of travel as well. And here's another example of kind of the in-depth look they went into traffic along the corridor. This is the intersection of Salem and Broadway. So if you're looking on the map, to the right, again, that's the Everett City line. To the left would be Melrose. And this little image is an artistic image showing how traffic flows through this specific intersection. So you can see that the majority of people are passing straight through the intersection, but you can see that there's also other folks who are making turning movements. So we've gone in depth with how many vehicles are on the roadway and which way they're going. So this example is just one intersection during the morning volumes. They obviously change for different intersections throughout the corridor and at different times, but these are the things that we have been looking at to make sure we're making the right decision. So in addition to looking at the road today, the traffic counts, we also should look at crash data, because safety is a big concern for residents that we've heard so far. So I looked at crash data from during a 5-year period between September 22nd, 2017 to 2022. During that time period, there were 368 crashes reported along the corridor. Of those 368, 19 involved a person walking or biking. When you take the average of how many crashes total crashes happen within that 5-year period, that's on average 1 per week. That's a lot of crashes. So there's definitely room for improvement for safety along the corridor. And in addition to that, 101 crashes involved non-fatal injury. Thankfully, there are no fatalities, but one thing we should keep in mind when redesigning the roadway is if we can make it safer so that we can avoid the risk of serious injuries or fatalities. So after going through all the existing conditions of Broadway, I want to spend some time going over complete streets, what they mean and why the state and federal government are funding these and why they're just important towards making sure that we can make Broadway accessible to all modes, all types of people and people of all abilities. So what's a complete street? So according to MassDOT, a complete streets make travel safe, comfortable, convenient, and accessible for people of all ages, abilities, and travel modes. So when we're talking about complete streets, we're talking about all these modes here on the right: pedestrians, bicyclists, vehicles and freight vehicles, and also transit, making sure that all of them can be incorporated safely, comfortably, and conveniently is what a complete street means. And why are we thinking about complete streets? So one, they prioritize safety because they provide all of these modes adequate facilities and they reduce travel speeds so that all users and modes can safely use the street together. They also connect a lot of the destinations within a city: home, work, school, shopping centers, restaurants, recreational areas, everything. Third, they improve the desirability of a community for residents of all ages, stages of life, and abilities. So thinking about those existing photos I shared earlier, where there are some sidewalks where there isn't a curb ramp. So if someone would like to access the outdoors, travel along Broadway, if you're an assisted mobility device, you won't be able to get into the street or travel. So making sure that we can have the street accessible to all abilities is very important. And fourth, complete streets expand the possible funding sources that can be used to reconstruct the roadway. I'm going to touch upon that a little bit later, but that's a key thing to how we're going forward with redesigning Broadway. So within Malden, we actually do have a complete streets policy. So the City Council and Mayor Christensen unanimously adopted a complete streets policy for Malden back in 2016. So you can see the first excerpt here. The purpose is to accommodate all road users whenever reasonable and financially feasible. And a second excerpt I took from it below is that all transportation infrastructure and street design projects requiring funding or approval by the City of Malden, as well as projects funded by the state and federal government for street and infrastructure design, shall integrate, as appropriate and or feasible, the City of Malden Complete Streets policy. So not only is it important to consider complete streets elements because of the 4 reasons I mentioned before, it's also a policy within the city that we are considering as we redesign Broadway. And not only is it a policy, but it's a Malden standard. So in 2017, the city developed a complete streets prioritization plan. This plan identified many projects that we could implement as complete streets. And since 2018, we've received $400,000 in grants to complete these types of projects. So some of the examples include the crossing at Northern Strand with the flashing beacons to help alert drivers of crossing trail users, the intersection of Salem, Ferry, and Main Street. There are curb extensions that shorten crosswalks and slow vehicle speeds, making it safer for those who are on foot or biking. And then we also have Main, Winter, and Forest Street. So there's a center medium refuge, again, which segments the crosswalk and makes a safer crossing for pedestrians. And I'd also like to point out that the state and federal government funds complete streets projects. Complete streets projects are competitive projects that receive millions in federal funding from the Boston MPO through the TIP. And I'm going to explain those 2 things right now. So first, the Boston MPO on the left, that's the logo there, is called the Boston Metropolitan Planning Organization. It's a 22-member voting body representing 97 cities and towns in the region. It's federally mandated, and it's a transportation planning organization for all metropolitan regions throughout the country. It's the Boston MPO that controls federal funding, and they prioritize complete streets projects in the Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP. So if you look to the right, the TIP, it's a 5-year rolling capital plan that programs federal funding for transportation projects in the region, those 97 cities and towns. The Boston MPO votes on which projects to fund, and they prioritize complete streets projects. And I'd like to point out that federal funds are vital towards constructing multi-million-dollar projects. And this is how the city feels that we can fund the reconstruction of Broadway using minimal local funds. So to summarize all this information, adopting a complete streets design for Broadway, when possible and feasible, allows Malden to compete for millions in federal funding to reconstruct the roadway. And this is an image of the 97 cities and towns. So you can ignore the subdivisions and the regions within the Boston MPO area, but you can see that we're competing against a lot of other communities. And if these communities are proposing complete streets projects, Malden could be left behind in receiving millions and millions of dollars in funding in order to do projects like reconstructing Broadway. So to give you an idea of some of the trade-offs, if we keep the same design, we're not going to have many opportunities to receive funding through competitive grant programs. Whereas if we implement a complete streets design, we can through the Boston MPO's TIP, which would give us the most substantial money to reconstruct the Broadway. If we keep the same design, construction is going to be a little bit costly. It's going to be a piecemeal approach, and it's going to take at least over a decade to finish. And we'd have to rely on local funds for design and construction. And I'd just like to note too that Malden receives about $900,000 in state funding to improve local roadways every year. To give you an idea of how much reconstructing Broadway will cost, it'd be 10 million. So we'd be diverting money away from necessary roadway projects like repaving, intersection improvements towards Broadway. And that's something that the city just can't handle. Whereas if we implement a complete street and get funded on the TIP, all the construction costs will be covered, and it could be complete. And it could also be implemented as a single project, whereas keeping the same design would be more piecemeal approach. And also, we've heard a lot of concerns from residents about the corridor. So if we keep the same design, we're failing to address those concerns. But if we implement a complete street, we can, address concerns regarding safety, lack of comfort, and accessibility issues. So this is the portion of the meeting where we're trying to get information from you, the residents. We want to hear about your concerns, ideas for improvement, opportunities. I'm going to give you an idea before we get started about some of the things that we've heard so far. And I won't go through this entire list, but we've heard residents have concerns about gaps in sidewalks, say crosswalks, traffic spilling over on the local streets because the traffic signals aren't able to efficiently move vehicles through, overgrowth on sidewalks, no sense of place. And we've heard from not only residents, but the principal of the Linden Academy, which is right near the Broadway and Salem intersection. I've spoken personally with the crossing guards at the intersection of Broadway and Salem about the really big safety concerns they have for students crossing at that intersection. We've gone through all the see, click, fix comments online. I've spoken to the chief of police, Glenn Cronin, and Lieutenant Tuxbury about some of the concerns they have. We've heard a lot of these things, the Reimagining Broadway zoning portion of the project, and also through the Malden Transit Action Plan. So again, the city is still looking to hear from residents, and we'd like to hear what concerns you have, what ideas you have for improvements, and your overall transportation vision for the corridor. So if you're joining online tonight, you can click the raise hand feature. I can call on you to unmute yourself and you'll have the opportunity to speak, or you could ask a question in the Q&A. And if you're calling in right now, you have to press star and then 9 to raise your hand. Then you'll be given permission to unmute, and then you can unmute yourself by pressing star and then 6. So I'm going to look at the list of attendees here, and I see we have a hand up from Councillor Steve Winslow. So Councillor, I'm going to allow you to speak, and you should be able to unmute yourself right now if you'd like to participate.
Okay, thank you, John. Thank you for the presentation. I want to thank everybody who's participating tonight. This is the first of many community meetings that we'll have to talk about this. You are also having some community meetings related to planning zoning along Broadway. I've lived in Malden over 30 years now, and there really has not been any major work done on Broadway in that period of time. One of the things being involved for the past 5 years on the city council, I realized Malden has about 108 miles of roads, and we get, as John mentioned, just about $1 million a year from state gas taxes to repair roads. So it costs at least $1 million a mile to usually just repave a residential street. So, basically, if we only have access to $1 million a year, it could take 100 years to fix all our streets. And that means that, if we put a lot of that money into Broadway, it means residential streets will not get paved. And, the thing about the state and federal money is that, those really focus on regional projects and, state number roads like Broadway, which is Route 99. We can't really apply for many competitive grants to, just repave a residential street. So we try to prioritize that $1 million and some other money the city comes up with on residential streets. And, for major streets like this, it makes sense to pursue, these grants. And, like I say, I'm not aware of, I did happen to come across back in 1948, the state did come up with money to redo Broadway. I think that probably paved over those trolley tracks that were there. That was probably one of the last times the state put so much money into this road. So it's been, 70 years or more. And, are we going to wait another 70 years? I mean, what's happened since 1948 is we do, there's new standards in place, as John mentioned. Both, city, state, and federal requires us to consider what we call context sensitive or complete streets that, unlike what happened in the 1950s, where the focus was strictly on the quick movement of motor vehicles, the standards that are applied now is to look at not only movement and efficient movement, but it's efficient movement of people and goods, not just a vehicle. So that's one of the things that happens. So so that is a key thing. I do also want to emphasize that there is not any particular plan or design that's been committed. Like I say, this is the first of a community meeting. We want to hear people's input and feedback. I mean, there's a lot of different options and a lot of different information that will be processed and taken into account. This is not a speedy process. I think people, maybe saw how quickly we put some bus lanes down on Pleasant Street. This is not that kind of process that we were under, where we were kind of under the gun for something there to get a grant. This is a grant that's much longer in term. And there will be, this initial community process before we would ever build this thing. There's always a requirement for another 25% design meeting where they'll be put back. So there'll be plenty of opportunities for community input. And this is just a very preliminary thing. So, so just really want to appreciate your input. And, like I say, this is a start of the conversation. Looking forward to hear more from people. And that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Winslow. So I'm looking at the list right now. I'm going to allow Gary Chin to unmute yourself and feel free to talk right now.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Great. My name is Gary Chin, and I live with my wife, Madison, near the Maplewood neighborhood of Malden. And our family is a single car, low car usage household that moves about the city, mostly, via all modes. We do drive a fair bit, but mostly bicycling and walking. But I'm in 100% support of a complete streets design with repaved roads and restriped roads with bicycle accommodations and bus shelters along the corridor, because in its current state, my wife and I pretty much avoid Broadway at all costs. Like, we don't walk there, even though there are a lot of places that we would love to go to, like LA Fitness and Lowe's. When I do bike there, I try to take the side streets, and right by High Rock Park, there's like huge gradient hills that I have to basically ride through to try and avoid riding Broadway, which is ridiculous. So yeah, I'm in complete support of a complete streets redesign, and I would love to have Broadway be a place that we feel safe going to. In its current state, we pretty much drive, and even when we do, it's all torn up and it's not pleasant. So thank you.
Thanks, Gary, for your input. Okay, so I'm not seeing any other hands raised right now. I love other participants. If you're attending the meeting and listening, if you'd like to speak up, it'd be great. Let's see, it looks like we have Lieutenant Evan Tuxbury hand up. I'm gonna allow you to unmute yourself and you can speak up.
Hi, John. Thank you for the presentation. And I just want to say I appreciate the attention you've brought to this area. The police know this is an area of high crash incidents. If you look at the publicly available crash statistics, anyone can look this up. As you pointed out in your slideshow, it's on that mass crash data portal. You can enter the time frame that you want to view. You can look in maybe your neighborhood if there's another area you're interested in. But one thing that jumps out at you is the Broadway corridor has some of the highest incident of motor vehicle crashes within the city. The only other area that I'm looking at right now in front of me that's pretty high is Main Street, in that corridor that intersects Route 60. And I know that's something that they've been working on, and we hope to see some of those numbers go down in the future. But Broadway certainly is something that needs your attention, needs the city's attention. And I hope the residents support this initiative of the Complete Streets project. From my experience, we see those 2 lanes of travel going opposite ways from Everett turning into 4 lanes of undivided travel in Malden. I think that's like an antiquated design that we really should look at, narrowing that roadway down or putting other modes of travel in place on that roadway to kind of reduce some of the speeds and vehicle conflict that you see happening when lanes go from 2 to 4. It's really not moving traffic more fluidly through that area. We know that's proven. Maybe turn lanes that would help assist vehicles turning, get them out of the roadway, and you wouldn't see such a high incidence of crash on that segment of roadway. Particularly as the counselor pointed out, up at Hunting Street and Salem Street at that intersection of Broadway, a lot of school children crossing there. We really want to see some work done there, and I know it's going to be a lot of money. If you could secure something from the federal government funds, that would be excellent. And I know we already have plans that could probably materialize a little bit more quickly going this route instead of the city funding it. It's pretty much all I have to add on that, other than I had a note here about, again, those, maybe if you could speak to that, the 4 lanes of travel versus 2 lanes, and if that would change your commute at all through that area on Broadway. I know some people are concerned with that. If we went to a complete streets design, they feel that congestion might move traffic to feeder streets or collector streets. And from my experience or what I have seen is that is not the case. I don't know if you could answer that question.
So I don't have the exact answer right now, but I know that our consultants are currently performing some traffic analyses, which do include looking at reducing vehicle lanes along that portion of the 4-lane segment to see what the impacts on traffic would be. It's my feeling in one of the graphics that I showed earlier, where it has each segment of Broadway. You could see that the northern portion of Broadway going towards Melrose, that had a lot more traffic volumes there than it did the portion south of the intersection with Eastern Ave. So it's interesting that we have 4 lanes at the portion that has less vehicles traveling down it, and we only have 2 lanes at the portion that has more vehicle traffic. So I don't have an exact answer to that, Lieutenant Tuxbury, but definitely something that our consultants are considering right now and looking into.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so I see that Councilor Winslow, you have your hand up again, I think, so I'm going to allow you to talk if you'd like to mention something.
Yeah, no, I think you pointed out, John, I think it was very interesting, the data that was gathered is that the stretch from Elwell and Central Avenue down towards Salem Street is actually the most heavily traveled. So I think that was about 9,500 vehicles versus the stretch, which is 4 lanes, which is like around 7,000. So I think that's very interesting. I don't know if people are familiar. When I worked at Malden Redevelopment Authority, one of my responsibilities was working on Commercial Street, that from Medford Street down to Wellington Station. So it's very interesting. At one point, I think back in 2016, I did a comparison. Commercial Street heading towards Wellington is basically 1 lane in each direction with turn lanes, and Commercial Street north of Medford Street is more like what you see in that stretch from Route 60 to Everett. And at least on that road, and this is a road in Malden, basically in Medford, 75% less crashes when you have the ability to have turn lanes. So that's just one of the things, as the lieutenant talked about, very important. The other thing is just there was some data. We went through a process with the Traffic Commission to look at the crossing of the Northern Strand Trail in Route 60, and we took several sets of traffic counts related to that, as well as speed data. And there were people, traveling in that spot up to 50 miles an hour. And, that's a spot where, there's residents there. So I know for a fact that they're, particularly in the residential stretch, I know people that, that are living on Broadway, they can literally take their lives into their hand just pulling out of their driveway because of the great uncertainty of the speed. So that's just another, like a safety factor. And I say it is, especially considering that at both ends of Broadway, you have a road that's, 2 lanes or 1 lane in each direction. The middle part just encourages people to speed, and it, can't really handle it. It doesn't handle any more traffic because there's no way to get more traffic in there because it's only 1 lane in each direction leading in. So it just ends up being a speedway and something that's unsafe. So I definitely think that's something that's should be strongly considered. Some designs that are safer, as the lieutenant pointed out, and what makes sense in terms of turn lanes or dedicated lanes. As you saw, there used to be dedicated lanes for trolleys. Would there be dedicated for buses? That's can be part of the discussion and something that could be considered. Like I say, no decisions, but like we can look at that as we go forward. Thank you.
Yeah, that last part you mentioned, Counselor. We are looking at different projects that are happening at the same time that affect Broadway. So obviously there's the zoning portion of this project, which just wrapped up their community meetings, and there's information on the city's website if you want to look into that. But there's also the MBTA's bus network redesign, and the MBTA is complete. I know you know this, but for the group, I know that the MBTA is revamping their entire bus network map, and they put out a draft proposal very recently. And in their proposal, they propose having a high frequency route along Broadway that would connect Sullivan Square to Linden Square, and it would come every 15 minutes, at least every 15 minutes throughout the day from 5 a.m. to 1 a.m. So if it gets implemented, there are going to be a lot more buses traveling down Broadway. So that's something that we're considering in our project right now. Great. So I'm not seeing any other hands raised right now. To anyone else in the meeting, if you'd like to make a comment, you can raise your hand using the raise hand feature. It should be at the bottom of your screen with the buttons with mute, stop video, things like that. And if you're calling in, again, press star and then 9 to raise your hand virtually, and I can let you speak up. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any other hands raised with the participants right now. So with that, I think I can move on to kind of the next steps for the city. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to review the public input that we've received to date. That includes some of the comments that we've heard tonight, but also all of the one-on-one conversations we've had with folks in the city, with residents throughout our other public meetings. We're also going to start thinking about some more in-person meetings with residents to kind of get more of these perspectives and ideas for how we can redesign the roadway. So we're going to collect all of this together, and we're going to develop conceptual designs for the corridor with our consultants. And we plan on sharing these conceptual designs for feedback at the next community meeting happening on October 26th, the same time from 6 to 7:30 p.m. That will be held virtually, but we'll look into other ways for residents can participate in those and provide feedback. So to wrap up, feel free to contact me if you ever want. My information's on the left. I'm John Alessi, transportation planner in the Office of Strategic Planning and Community Development. If you attended the meeting tonight and you didn't want to speak up during this forum, please write down my phone number right now and my email. I'm always here to talk if you want to speak about your ideas and vision for the corridor. If you want to participate in the second community meeting, I have the information down here. If you have a phone out right now, you could scan the QR code to have that up on your phone. And if you'd like to learn more about the project online, you can visit the city's webpage. It's called Reimagining Broadway Transportation, and you can also access it through the QR code or by going to our city's website, going to the Strategic Planning and Community Development Office, Transportation Planning, and then you'll see the Reimagining Broadway slide. So with that, I still don't see any hands raised, so I want to thank everyone for coming. Oh, actually, there's one question I have in the chat right the last moment. Let's see. So the question in the chat right now is that, are there plans to improve the sidewalks on Broadway, in particular the side where the Holy Cross Cemetery is? Those are the photos where I showed where there's only a dirt path right now. The attendee says it's really difficult to get through there because there's no paved sidewalk. And yes, I can say that the city is considering putting a sidewalk on that side. I know that there isn't that much space with the cemetery being located right there, especially with the old fence. But like we've spoken about in the past, we're going to start thinking about, based on our traffic analyses, can we reduce a vehicle lane in the 4-lane portion so that we can then put in a pedestrian facility there so that it's a little bit safer for pedestrians and increasing connectivity along the corridor. And again, if anyone wants to ask a question, feel free to right now, but if not, I think we're good to wrap up. So I'll give it one more second. And you can also look at the contact page if you want to write down my information. But I'm not seeing anything. So I want to thank everyone tonight for your participation. Please be involved. Come to the next community meeting, reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns, and I'm excited to get this project moving. So have a good night, everyone.